Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have vowed to take away your Second Amendment rights through gun bans, gun confiscation, and government regulations. Now, Joe Biden is no longer hiding his real intentions, and we need you to take action now.
Whether it's a 9mm pistol or whether it's a rifle, is ridiculous. I'm continuing to push to eliminate the sale of those things. But
the Biden administration is coming after your right to own any gun, and we need you to text PROTECT2A to 888-762-0221. Joe Biden has already issued executive orders. He is now demanding Congress push through radical gun legislation. You can fight back to stop Joe Biden's gun grab, but you must text PROTECT2A to 888-762-0221. Take action to protect your right to keep and bear arms. We urgently need millions of Americans to text PROTECT2A to 888-762-0221. Text PROTECT2A to 888-762-0221.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Daily Bullet. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me today, as he does every Friday, Alex Ooley of the Ooley Law Offices in Indiana. Alex, thanks for coming by today, man.
Yeah, no problem. Great to be with you, Paul.
So I want to get started with something that I actually didn't have up in show notes, but I want to find out what the legislative season in Indiana is not done yet. Any progress on constitutional carry?
So constitutional carry, as we discussed previously, passed out of the House overwhelmingly and was sent over to the Senate. And there's been some sort of backroom dealing in past years, and this year we don't know for sure what's going to happen yet, but the House bill from the is still alive. It's House Bill 1077. It was assigned to the Judiciary Committee, which is chaired by Senator Liz Brown, who didn't even give it a hearing last year, but she's a Republican. There's lots of pressure on her to give it a hearing, and I'm hopeful that she'll give it a hearing this year and a vote. Because we don't want it to be killed in backroom caucus meetings behind closed doors, because Republicans need to, I think, and Democrats alike, need to state their position publicly on the issue and give it a vote.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And Thomas Massey and Amanda and I talked about this on Wednesday. Thomas Massey kind of stirred the pot a little bit on Wednesday when he put out a tweet saying, look, Indiana governor and Indiana GOP, you're kind of dragging your feet on this. The world is watching, and we're waiting. So,
But the word is from some pretty reliable sources that a lot of pressure on the Senate Republicans is coming from the governor's office not to pass constitutional carry, because he doesn't want it to be on his desk and have to take a position, because he's got aspirations for higher office. So I don't know what his calculation is in that regard, but he's certainly not friendly to freedom and to the rights of Hoosiers to exercise their constitutional rights.
All right, so Indiana, if you're listening, if you're in Indiana, you need to switch your focus away from the Senate and start calling the governor's office. Start emailing the governor's office saying put pressure on the Senate to get the bill to the desk. Otherwise, your dream of being a senator is gone. Poof.
Yep.
Yeah, that. If you want it, Indiana. You're gonna have to work for it, and now move your attention to the governor's office. Let's go ahead and get started. Lee Williams had a story that I went out in the Truth About Guns today about when Biden first went into office. Alan Gottlieb and Lee Williams had an idea, and because the big push from Biden right out of the gate when he went into office was, I'm going to go after rogue gun dealers. And everybody who I know who's in the gun community goes, what rogue gun dealers? We don't know any rogue gun dealers. And so Lee Williams sent in a Freedom of Information Act request, and crickets, and now 8 months worth of crickets. What I wanted to ask Alex, and this, I know this is not, you're an Indiana attorney, you're certainly not a federal attorney, but does the Freedom of Information Act, does that have any teeth?
Yeah, so I do practice in federal court, but I've never dealt with a Freedom of Information Act request in federal court. But my understanding is that if the federal government office doesn't comply with the request, that there's not a whole lot you can do to make them comply with the request, other than file a lawsuit, and then if you prevail, you'd be entitled to attorney fees. But there's no personal responsibility, because guess what? Who's paying your attorney fees if you prevail? It's the taxpayers, not the agency itself. So there's not much incentive there for the agency to comply with the request in a timely fashion. So this request that was made by the Second Amendment Foundation, I think it was what's the name of it? The Center for Investigative Journalism.
Yep.
Is that the name of it? They wanted to vet Biden's claim here about rogue gun dealers, and they sent in this request, this Freedom of Information Act request, and I guess have been stonewalled for quite a while. And it's a pretty simple request. It seems like all they're asking for is a few simple items: copies of documents that show the number of FFLs and their state of residence who have been prosecuted for willfully transferring a firearm to a prohibited person over the last 3 years. So basically what they're trying to get at here is, have FFLs transferred firearms to people who are prohibited from possessing one? Are there rogue gun dealers, as Biden calls them? And, it's interesting because FFLs are one of the most highly regulated federal license holders there is. So yeah. It would be surprising if there were rogue gun dealers, or very many at least.
Yeah, absolutely. They certainly wouldn't be around for very long, I think, if there were. And you would think that with Biden's big push to get rid of rogue gun dealers, they would get one and be shouting it from the rooftops, look, we're prosecuting this, and be publicizing it nationwide.
Mm-hmm. And look, I mean, like so many gun control proposals, this is not about actually preventing crime. This is about limiting the rights of law-abiding citizens to exercise their right to protect themselves and their families, and making it more difficult to acquire a firearm for that purpose. And it would do almost nothing to curb crime in any way, to crack down on rogue gun dealers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. When I heard President Biden's speech a little over a week ago, when he was talking in New York and he started talking about rogue dealers, I got the feeling that he was about to move from rogue gun dealers, and he was going to push that over to ending the individual transfer of firearms. In other words, I couldn't sell a gun to my next door neighbor if my next door neighbor, who I know is a good guy, were to happen to be interested in buying one, or I couldn't buy his gun for him if he had one he wanted to sell. That's where I thought he was going to be going next.
Yeah. There's going to be a call for universal background checks, and again, I think that will do very little to curb crime and serve mostly to curb law-abiding citizens from transferring firearms freely amongst each other. So obviously we don't want that, and the worst part of universal background checks is that it creates a de facto database of every firearms transfer. So that helps gun control activists achieve their purpose of eventually creating a registration of every firearm. So
and I don't think you and I talked about it, but last week there was a story that the ATF is creating a de facto registration database by collecting the 4473s. Well, first of all, by requiring the FFLs to keep their 4473 records effectively forever, and they're keeping the digital versions themselves forever. And when I was scrolling through social media, I seen a fact check proves this is false, and I thought, well, how could that be false? So I clicked on it, and they said, well, the false to it was, well, this is not searchable. If it's computerized, of course it's searchable. I don't know how you can make it computerized and still make it not searchable, where you've got to go through it document by document. That just doesn't make sense to me.
And if it's not searchable, it could easily be made searchable, I would think. And yeah, and of course, the gap in their de facto database is these private transfers that take place lawfully every day between law-abiding citizens. And by implementing universal background checks, that helps close the gap and create the database of gun owners that they want.
Yeah. Well, and there is another gap, and that is in states like South Dakota, if you have an enhanced carry permit. And there are several states like this. I think North Carolina is another one, but there are several more. If you have in South Dakota, if you have an enhanced permit, you can walk into the firearms retailer, and instead of filling out a 4473, just show them your enhanced carry permit that proves you've passed the background check, and that's good enough. You cash and carry your firearm right there. So no 4473, you proved you're good enough, and there you go. So
yeah, and I hate to rehash this too much because most of your listeners know, the danger of universal background checks is that it creates this de facto database registration system, and the favorite tool of all tyrants is taking away the firearms from the citizens of the people they govern. And so that's obviously a terrible outcome.
Yeah. Let me get this comment in here before we move on to the next story. John over on the Facebook side says, my local FFL who operated out of his house just quit because he felt the ATF would start witch hunts. That's really unfortunate, because I think that's what the Biden administration is hoping, is that they're hoping to drive FFLs out of business, if not through the intimidation, eventually through creating so many headaches that it's just not worth being in that business.
Yeah, listen, I understand the reluctance to stay in business because you don't want the ATF knocking at your door, but that's exactly what the Biden administration is hoping for, is to chill the ability or the willingness of people to engage in the sale of arms, and to make it more difficult for private citizens to purchase them. And so even now with just talk about these sorts of measures, it's already having a chilling effect.
Yeah. Next story I wanted to talk about today is, and then this one, it caught my attention, but not for the reason you might think. This one comes at us from yahoo.com. Chattanooga Mayor, and let me get this one pulled up in my browser here. Chattanooga Mayor Tim Kelly has just been appointed co-chair of Mayors Against Illegal Guns. Why that caught my attention is that Mayors Against Illegal Guns is still around. They were big for a little while, but what kept happening is Mayors Against Illegal Guns kept having their members go to jail. They were having mayors get kicked out of office and actually going to jail because they were breaking one law or another as mayor of their city, and they were kept facing disgrace. I hadn't seen anything Mayors for Illegal Guns in a very long time, and all of a sudden this popped up in my news search today. I'm like, wow, there's something from the past I wasn't expecting to see.
Yeah, I'm like you. I hadn't seen anything about them in quite a while, but they're an arm of Every Town for Gun Safety, which is a Bloomberg-funded group. And I was looking at their page, and one thing that they say in their mission statement, their statement of principles, is that they support life-saving gun violence prevention laws like background checks on all gun sales. There's the universal background checks, domestic violence firearm relinquishment, and red flag laws. And they oppose harmful laws like stand your ground, permitless carry, guns in schools and state preemption. So,
Wow.
yeah, they've got almost every policy they can take a stance on exactly backwards, in my opinion. And I suspect almost no data to support their positions in this regard. So I mean, I don't know how influential the group is, but Everytown for Gun Safety is in the news quite a bit. They're heavily funded by Bloomberg, who we all know is Michael Bloomberg is very wealthy.
Yep.
But the beautiful thing about the gun rights advocates is that, you know, it's supported by everyday people like you and me, Paul, and the listeners of this show. Millions of folks, everyday, ordinary Americans who enjoy freedom, family, and guns. And, you know, they support organizations like the Second Amendment Foundation and the NRA and other gun rights firearms policy coalition. Through hard-earned dollars. There's not rich millionaires, billionaires supporting the cause. It's just millions of folks contributing $20-25 when they can. So that's where the power comes from. That's for sure.
Well, and let's face it, millionaires and billionaires, they can buy their own security. If a billionaire wants 24/7 security, he doesn't need to have a gun. He just hires a security firm and has somebody stand outside his door with a gun, and when that person shifts over, the next person shows up. It's not a big deal for them. It's an extra expense. I can't afford to hire somebody to stand outside my door and guard my house while I sleep. That is just not in my budget, and not in most Americans' budget.
Right. Yeah, it's comical when you see. It's frustrating when you first see it, but it's comical. All you can do is laugh at it when you see pictures of politicians who advocate for gun control and they're surrounded by a bunch of Secret Service people or their own privately hired security, and they're advocating to take away our firearms.
You know, one thing I found amusing when the year I met you, when we had the NRA show down in Indianapolis, Shannon Watts made a big deal of her and her demanding mommies were going to make a big protest at the Indianapolis NRA show. They came down with a couple dozen people, but the photograph that came out of there was she was surrounded by guards with big bulges coming out of their suit coats. And I'm like, hypocrisy right there. You're surrounded by 5 or 6 armed guards, and the similarity to Secret Service was uncanny.
Yeah, there's no end to the hypocrisy in that regard. That's for sure. And the irony of it all too is that, you know, there are 80,000 armed Americans attending that conference, and it's the safest time to be in downtown Indianapolis. By far.
Absolutely. You know, when I get to go to places like the NRA annual meetings, like Gun Rights Policy Conference put on by SAF, or like next weekend when I go down to the big rally down in Phoenix, put on by AZCDL, when I get to go to these things and I'm surrounded by armed people, I very rarely feel more safe. Even if I'm not armed myself, I know that a whole bunch of people around me are, and they're good people to start with, and I don't ever worry about it at all.
Yeah, and it's refreshing because it's one of the few events you can go to with tens of thousands of people, and you don't have to push and shove. Everybody's polite, you know, courteous.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's an interesting event to go to. That's for sure.
All right, let's get a couple more stories in here. Next one, good news coming out of New Mexico. They had a gun storage bill that was gaining a lot of steam, but it died in a House committee. It passed the Senate, but it died in House committee. Does not look like it's going to go any farther, so it will not become law this year in New Mexico.
Yeah, that's great news. Safe storage laws, I think, are very problematic because how do you enforce them? I think is the real issue with those. Uh, you know, are you going to require that people who have firearms in their homes submit to searches that other folks wouldn't have to? It seems like it creates quite a few problems with the Fourth Amendment, especially in addition to the Second Amendment.
Yeah. I want to get this in from John. This comment. New York City and Philly are firing their first responders who have not been vaxxed starting today. That's from John over on the Facebook side. And that ties directly into a story that I wasn't probably going to talk about on the air today. As a matter of fact, in the show notes, I said I probably wasn't going to talk about it, but I think I am. My governor, Kristi Noem of South Dakota, put out a story today about how she's been fighting for our gun rights, and she's very proud that the very first law she signed in South Dakota was constitutional carry. She's running for re-election as governor, but unfortunately for me, and I say it unfortunately, the rest of the country may be cheering, but I love her as governor. I want her to stay as governor for a full 4 more years. But it looks like she's really eyeing the GOP nomination for president for 2024. So we may only get her for governor as 2 more years. But she also, going off on that, she has been actively recruiting California, New York, anywhere. If you're first responder or law enforcement that has been fired because of vaccination, she's actively recruiting people to come to South Dakota to fill law enforcement openings here.
Yeah, I don't blame you, Paul, wanting to keep her as governor in South Dakota. She, from the very beginning of the pandemic, I think she did a great thing, and she said, "Listen, all you other states that are locking down, if you're somebody who lives in one of those states, South Dakota is open. We're free. We're not going to close your business. We're not going to make you lock you in your home. We're not going to, mask your kids and separate them from other people. That we're a free state and we're going to keep it that way. And if you love freedom and the American way, come to South Dakota." And I thought that was a pretty effective message.
Yes. Now, I will say this: in South Dakota, individual school districts have had individual policies about masking, but I can't think of a single school district where there are mask mandates up now. And honestly, we really beat the trend nationwide, because there were, when COVID was bad, we did have mask mandates up in the schools, but they dropped as soon as the cases dropped. Those mask mandates went away. And individual cities did have some regulations. When I'm going to say in early 2020, individual cities did have some, restrictions on what businesses could, for example, your restaurant could open at 50%, which was with Sioux Falls, was my hometown, was always the most restrictive. But that lasted for about 3 weeks, enough that it became novel to go out and eat once it got lifted. And then the 50% went away after about 2 weeks, and nobody's ever thought of it again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't think any state has handled this perfectly, but even states like South Dakota and Florida, have learned from their mistakes to the extent that they made any, and tended toward freedom over tyranny. So.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, freedom for the individual people, freedom is always your best option. I am a member of the Republican Party. I consider myself a libertarian, and I always vote freedom, no matter what. I fight for freedom, and I vote freedom. So that's where my first loyalty lies. Is not necessarily Republican. it's always my first loyalty is freedom. I do want to talk about this next one that we got from John Petrolino over there at Bearing Arms. Apparently, Connecticut is pushing forward some. Doggone it! Now my I can't get it to pull up, but there's some. Let me try a different way to get this to pull up.
While you're looking at that,
Yeah.
your comments about freedom made me think about I don't know the quote exactly. I think it was Ayn Rand, but she said that the greatest minority, or the smallest minority on earth, is the individual, and those who deny individual liberty are not for the minority. You know, they deny minorities their rights. So I agree with you. Individual liberty and freedom are the highest political values anyway.
Yes. Connecticut Governor Lamont has put forward a wide-ranging bill or proposal to cut violence, gun violence specifically, and Connecticut Citizens Defense League has come out obviously against that. But I pulled up this article on Bearing Arms by John Petrolino, and there's 4 points to the governor's plans that CCDL has specific problems with, and 2 of them I really don't have a problem with. 3 of them, actually 5. There are 5 points. The first 2, doubling the number of officers trained annually for municipal state police with a rapid pace of new state trooper classes planned. After defund the police, you know what? I'm all for adding police back in. I'm certainly pro police. There can be a point when there are too many, but I can't think of a single jurisdiction right now. I can be proved wrong, but I've been all over a lot of places. I can't think of a single jurisdiction right now in the United States where there are too many. Second point, providing $2.5 million for pandemic-related costs to help hard-hit police departments to put additional officers on the beat. Same thing. I don't have a problem with that.
Thinking back to all the rioting and the sort of the events that gave rise to this defund the police movement, I don't think the problem is with law enforcement funding or even the number of law enforcement necessarily, that it's too much or there are too many or too little, but that law enforcement officers are asked to enforce too many laws that put them into conflict with people day to day when they ordinarily wouldn't be interacting with them. And those interactions inevitably lead to a rise in the possibility of an unfortunate accident. So, I think we have too many laws that are malum prohibitum rather than malum in se. That's just a fancy Latin phrase. Malum in se means it's wrong in itself. Something like murder, it's wrong. Malum prohibitum is wrong because it's against the law. There's a law against it. It's not wrong in itself, like going over the speed limit. There's nothing inherently wrong with going over the speed limit. There's nothing inherently wrong with possessing marijuana, okay? But because it's against the law and law enforcement officers are asked to enforce those sorts of things, that puts them into everyday interaction with individuals when they ordinarily wouldn't otherwise.
The getting to the ones I do have a problem with, implementing a first-in-the-nation approach to reimburse hospital-based violence intervention programs, including Medicaid funding. Violence intervention problems usually mean citizen disarmament, and using Medicaid money for that, dude, that's really not what that's intended for. Medicaid funding is usually to help indigent elderly people pay for their medical bills. I'd really love you to spend that money on that, Governor.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I don't know what these violence prevention intervention programs entail, but I also don't have any degree of confidence that they're actually going to do any good to prevent violence, and will likely simply cost money and deprive people of their rights. So,
and then the last one here, supporting common sense public safety measures like Ethan's Law and the 2019 Ghost Gun Reform, and then for legislation specifically establishing a gun tracing task force to identify the source of illegal guns. I don't know of an illegal gun. It's all my guns are undocumented. I don't have any illegal ones. They're just undocumented.
right, and there's not really an illegal gun. There's illegal possession of certain types of guns, or illegal transfer, or illegal. But it's kind of like gun violence, right? Guns don't commit violence. People commit violence, and people do illegal things. So coupling the word gun with sinister sounding words just sort of feeds the gun control propaganda.
Yeah. And then last one on here, there's several more, and we're already over time, so I'm gonna hurry this along a little bit. But ensure gun stores take their obligations seriously. I'll ensure you this: anybody in that has an FFL, they are serious about what they do. Modified carry laws, there's a real red flag there. Close loopholes in assault weapons laws. Ugh. And make domestic violence convictions an automatic disqualifier for holding a carry permit. Okay, the Lautenberg Amendment kind of had that effect on the federal level, at least. So, yeah. Again, I just anyway. Yeah, looks like CCDL is right on track there. We're already over time. I don't have time to get a lot more of that in. So, I think what we should do then is we're just going to go ahead. I need to let everybody know there is going to be a weekly bullet tomorrow at noon Central Time, but there will not be a daily bullet next Friday because I'm flying out to Phoenix. There will not be a weekly bullet next Saturday because I will be in Phoenix. But if you're catching us on OpsLens, you will be able to see you'll be able to see the rally on the OpsLens app next Saturday. If you're catching us on Facebook or YouTube, get the OpsLens app and you'll be able to see the rally if you cannot attend. And if you're going to the rally, come look me up when you're there. I'd love to shake your hand and say hi. Alex, man, we are, as I said, we're already over on our time, but thanks for joining me today. It's always fun to work with you, man.
Yeah, great to be with you as always, Paul. Thanks for having me.
All right, folks, that does it for us today. Thanks again for watching, podcast listeners. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.